When your dog brings home a bobcat and refuses to let go, everyone thought it was a mistake. Is he crazy? It's a wildcat. It's dangerous. The whispers spread quickly among the gathered villagers. Bruno must have mistaken him for a stray cat. Another tried to explain, although the German shepherd's determined gaze told a completely different story. While Bruno's owner Hans was still confused and worried, veterinarian Anna was called in. Seeing the little wildcat trembling behind Bruno, one of its hind legs bleeding, she was stunned and exclaimed in a trembling voice, "Bruno is not mistaken. He is trying to save this cat." To hear the full touching story of Bruno and Luke's, don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow along. Adrenaline shot through Marcus Weber's veins like an electric shock. A growl, deep and throaty, ripped him from his half-sleep on the sofa. Not Bruno's usual growl when the postman came. This one was different, terrified, aggressive. He stumbled to his feet, his heart pounding in his ribs. Through the dim light coming through the patio door, he saw the silhouette of his German shepherd Bruno, massive tense ears, flattened, and in front of him, almost buried beneath him, a smaller, trembling bundle. "Bruno, get out!" Marcus yelled, his voice hoarse with sudden panic. He stumbled to the door and flung it open. The smell hit him first, a mixture of damp fur, earthy forest floor, and something else, something wild and musky, and blood. A thin metallic scent hung in the cold evening air. Bruno didn't respond to his command. Instead, he pressed the trembling creature harder to the ground, a warning rumble vibrating in his chest. Marcus's eyes adjusted to the darkness. The bundle was an animal, no doubt about it. Too small for a fox, too big for a house cat. Spotted fur, barely visible in the shadow of Bruno's body. Then he saw the ears, short-pointed, tufted ears, and eyes, two glowing ambers staring at him in terror. A lynx, a damned lynx cub, here on his terrace in the middle of the small settlement on the edge of the Black Forest. "Bruno, he'll let it go." Marcus tried again, his voice now trembling noticeably. He dared a step forward. Bruno snapped at the air, not at him, but a clear warning. His own dog, the gentle Bruno, who couldn't hurt a fly, defended this wild animal with an intensity Marcus had never experienced before. The neighbor, Mrs. Keller, turned on her porch light, attracted by the noise. Her head appeared over the garden fence. "Mr. Weber, is everything okay? What's Bruno doing?" Her voice was shrill with curiosity and concern. Marcus couldn't answer. He stared at the bloody fur on the lynx's flank, at the way Bruno stood protectively over him, every muscle tensed, ready to defend himself. What was going on? How did a lynx get here? And why the hell was his dog acting like he'd found the Holy Grail and would defend it to the death? Panic and a deep, inexplicable confusion fought for dominance within him. The situation was absurd, dangerous, and defied all logic. He stood frozen, unable to act, trapped in a nightmare that had only just begun. Marcus Weber was a man of routine. At 49, he had built a life as orderly as the tools in his small carpentry shop in the village of Waldberg. Waldberg itself was a tranquil place nestled in the rolling hills and dense forests of the Black Forest, not far from Freiburg. A place where everyone knew each other, and the biggest excitement was the annual Christmas market. Marcus had grown up here, taken over the carpentry business from his father, and never really left. He wasn't a man of many words, more of an observer, someone who understood the grain of wood better than the complexity of human relationships. His wife had died of cancer 5 years ago, and since then, Bruno and his work had been his only constant companions. Bruno, a 3-year-old German shepherd with a glossy black and brown coat and intelligent eyes, was more than just a pet. He was Marcus's shadow, his confidant, the silent listener to his unspoken thoughts. Every morning at 6 o'clock sharp, Bruno nudged him awake. Then came the walk through the still, dewy forest, the sounds of nature awakening the crunching of leaves under his paws and boots. Bruno was well-trained, obedient, but also endowed with a strong protective instinct, which in a village like Waldberg usually meant keeping deer away from the vegetable patch or chasing strange cats out of the garden. He was well known and beloved in the village, a gentle giant who loved children and let the old ladies spoil him with treats. Marcus's days followed a fixed pattern breakfast work in the workshop, where the scent of fresh wood and glue hung in the air. Lunch, more work, and then the long evening walk with Bruno, often deeper into the forest than in the morning. The woods were his refuge, a place of silence and peace. He knew every path, every old tree. Recently, however, a subtle change had crept in. The forests seemed to have become quieter. Fewer deer trails, less birdsong. Old hunters in the village murmured about poachers, about strange tracks they couldn't identify. But these were just rumors, thought Marcus, the whispers of old men who could no longer cope in the modern world. The relationship with the other villagers was friendly, but distant. People greeted each other, chatted over the garden fence, and helped each other when needed. There was Mr. Schmidt, the retired teacher, who always knew everything better. Mrs. Huber, from the small village shop, who dispensed the latest news like hotcakes. And, of course, the local veterinarian, Dr. Lena Vogel, a competent woman in her mid-40s who had only moved to the area a few years ago, but had quickly gained the respect of the community. Marcus had consulted her a few times about Bruno's vaccinations. He appreciated her direct, straightforward manner. His world was small, but it was his. A world of predictability, of clear rules. A lynx bleeding and frightened, guarded by its dog, who suddenly seemed unpredictable. That didn't fit into this world. It was a foreign body, a tear in the fabric of his orderly existence. He had heard of lynx slowly returning to the Black Forest, strictly protected, shy animals that one almost never saw. The fact that one of them, a young one at that, should appear on his terrace was more than unusual. It was disturbing. He had previously only been peripherally aware of the underlying tensions in the village regarding poaching. He wasn't a hunter, and as long as his own daily life wasn't directly affected, he tended to block such things out. But the sight of the injured lynx, the sheer panic in its eyes, and Bruno's inexplicable behavior began to strike a chord within him that he had long thought had gone silent. It was a feeling of responsibility mixed with a deep concern about what was really going on out there in the forest. Little did he yet suspect that this evening was just the beginning of a chain of events that would change his small, orderly world forever. The shock was profound. Marcus stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to think clearly. Mrs. Keller's worried cries from next door reached his ears only muffled. His gaze was fixed on the drama unfolding before him, his faithful Bruno, who seemed to have transformed into an unyielding beast, and the small spotted creature trembling for its life beneath him. "Bruno, that's it," Marcus tried with more authority, though his voice still trembled slightly. He took another hesitant step. Bruno growled louder, deeper, and lowered his head even further over the lynx, as if trying to cover it with his own body. The lynx's yellow eyes widened in fear, and a soft, pitiful whimper could be heard. Blood slowly seeped from a wound on the animal's flank, forming a dark pool on the patio tiles. "What's going on here, Mr. Weber? Should I call the police?" Mrs. Keller cried, clearly alarmed. Police! The thought startled Marcus. What could the police possibly do? Shoot his dog for protecting a wild animal? Take the lynx, which was obviously injured? No, that wasn't an option. He had to get the situation under control himself. No, Mrs. Keller, everything's fine, just a minor incident with Bruno. I can handle this, he called back, trying to radiate confidence he didn't feel in the slightest. He had to reassure her before the whole village gathered on his terrace. He took a deep breath and tried to suppress his own panic. Bruno usually responded to his voice to his moods. He had to stay calm. "Bruno, my dear," he began in a softer voice, "what do you have there? Show me. It's okay. It's okay." He spoke softly and soothingly to the dog, the way he did when Bruno was frightened during a thunderstorm. Slowly, very slowly, Bruno's tension seemed to ease a little. The growling became quieter, giving way to a deep growl. He raised his head slightly and looked at Marcus, his eyes still alert, but no longer quite as hostile. He seemed to understand that Marcus posed no immediate threat. Marcus seized the moment. "Come on, Bruno, sit, lie down." He pointed to a spot next to the lynx. Reluctantly, after another moment of hesitation during which he studied Marcus intensely, Bruno obeyed. He lay down, but his body remained tense, his snout just centimeters from the lynx. He never took his eyes off the small animal. Now Marcus could see the lynx better. It was barely larger than a full-grown house cat, its fur matted and torn in several places. The wound on its flank looked nasty, deep, and gaping. Something also seemed wrong with one of its hind legs. It was holding it at an odd angle. The animal was breathing shallowly and rapidly. "Oh my goodness," Marcus whispered. "What happened to you?" He knew he had to act. This animal needed help, and fast. The first thought that came to his mind was Dr. Vogel, the veterinarian. She may not have been as knowledgeable about wild animals as she was about dogs and cats, but she was the only one in the village who had medical knowledge. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed her number. As it rang, he looked at Bruno. The dog whined softly and gently nudged the lynx with his nose. It was a strange sight, this large, strong dog handling this injured wild animal so gently. The villagers, even he had thought Bruno was crazy for a moment when he arrived with this prey. It was a mistake, after all, to bring in a dangerous wild animal. But now, as Marcus took in the scene, the lynx's obvious distress and Bruno's instinctive, almost desperate effort to protect it, his perception began to shift. Was this really a mistake? Or was Bruno trying in his own canine way to do the right thing? "Dr. Vogel," Marcus said, when she finally answered. "This is Marcus Weber. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I have a huge problem here. Bruno, he's brought in a lynx, an injured lynx, and he won't let go." The silence on the other end of the line was almost tangible. Marcus could imagine Dr. Vogel frowning. "A lynx?" she finally asked incredulously. "Yes, a cub, I think. It's injured, pretty badly by the looks of it." His first decision had been made. He would try to help this animal. His initial goal was clear: to get the lynx medical care and find out what had happened to it. The confusion gave way to a strange determination. He didn't yet know what he was letting himself in for, but the sight of the suffering animal and Bruno's unwavering loyalty left him no other choice. The village community's initial reaction, the assumption that Bruno was crazy or had made a mistake, gave way in his mind to another more pressing question. Who or what had done this to this lynx doctor? Lena Vogel arrived 20 minutes later, her face a mixture of professional curiosity and incredulous surprise. She parked her old station wagon in front of Marcus's house and got out with her heavy veterinary bag. The floodlights from Marcus's terrace illuminated the scene as bright as day. "Good evening, Mr. Weber," she said, her voice calm but firm. Her gaze wandered from Marcus to Bruno and then to the small spotted bundle that still lay trembling under Bruno's watchful eye. "So, this is the patient." Marcus nodded silently. He had persuaded Bruno to lie down a few meters away, but the dog remained restless, repeatedly getting up, whining softly, and watching Lena and Marcus's every move with eagle eyes. Lena carefully knelt next to the lynx. "Hello, little one," she murmured gently. "Don't be afraid." The lynx hissed weakly, trying to make itself even smaller. Lena moved slowly, continuing to speak in a soothing voice. She pulled a pair of gloves from her pocket. "Bruno, stay," Marcus said firmly, as his dog made a move to come closer. Lena carefully began examining the animal. She checked its breathing, its pulse, then its wounds. "The wound on its flank is deep." She noted her brow furrowed. "Looks like a tear, perhaps from a sharp object or a fight. And the hind leg, yes, that's definitely broken. A compound fracture, I'd say." As she worked, she spotted something around the lynx's neck, half hidden in the matted fur. She gently pulled on it. It was a thin leather collar, the kind used for domestic cats, but this one was rough and worn. Attached to it was a small bent metal tag. Lena held it up to the light. "What is that?" asked Marcus. "A tag," Lena said thoughtfully. "Not an official wildlife tag, more like private." She squinted to decipher the engraved letters. "It says Shadow Catcher." "Shadow Fang," Marcus repeated, confused. "Never heard of it." "Me neither," Lena replied. "But this isn't a normal collar for a wild animal. Lynx don't wear collars, especially not ones like this." She examined the wound on his neck more closely where the collar had chafed. "He's obviously been kept, and not very well judging by the chafing and his general condition. He's malnourished." The implications of what Lena said slowly began to sink in. This lynx wasn't just an injured wild animal. It was possibly an escaped animal, perhaps, from illegal captivity. The word poacher, which had been circulating in the village lately, suddenly took on a new, more sinister meaning. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked, feeling overwhelmed. "First, we need to stabilize him," Lena said resolutely. "I need to clean and stitch the wound and at least temporarily splint the fracture. I can't do that optimally here. We need to take him to my office." Transporting the lynx was the first major challenge. Although small, the lynx was still a wild animal, frightened and with sharp claws and teeth. Lena had a transport box with her, but getting it into it without further injuring it or herself was difficult. Surprisingly, it was Bruno who resolved the situation. When the lynx panicked and began to hiss and scratch, Bruno laid his head next to the box and whined softly, almost imploringly. The lynx froze, looked at Bruno, and after a moment of silence, Lena, wearing thick leather gloves, carefully lifted him into the box. In Lena's small practice, which consisted of only 2 treatment rooms and a small laboratory, they worked late into the night. Lena anesthetized the lynx, cleaned and stitched the deep flesh wound, and applied a cast to the broken hind leg. Marcus assisted as best he could, passing instruments and holding lamps. The silence was broken only by the beeping of the monitoring devices and Lena's occasional instructions. "He's a fighter," Lena finally said when they were finished, exhausted, and took off her gloves. The little lynx now lay quietly in a clean box covered with a warming blanket. But he's been through a lot. The injuries aren't fresh, maybe a day or 2 old, and he's dehydrated and emaciated. "Shadow Fang," Marcus murmured. "What if someone's looking for him?" Lena looked at him seriously. "That's quite possible. And if he came from illegal captivity, those people won't be happy that he's gone and that we have him." She rubbed her tired eyes. "We need to inform the authorities, the forestry authorities, maybe even the police, about possible poaching or illegal animal trafficking." The next morning, they set to work. Lena contacted the relevant forestry authority and a friendly animal welfare organization that had experience with wild animals. Marcus spoke with the village policeman, a friendly man named Weber, no relation, who took the report, but didn't offer much hope that anything concrete would come of it quickly. "Illegal animal husbandry is difficult to prove, Mr. Weber, unless you have solid evidence." The first few days were marked by uncertainty. The lynx, whom they provisionally named Lucky, slowly recovered under Lena's care. Marcus visited him daily, bringing him special food that Lena had procured. Bruno wasn't allowed into the practice, but waited patiently in the car each time. The story of Bruno's unusual discovery naturally spread like wildfire through the village. Reactions were mixed. Some admired Bruno's instinct, others shook their heads at Marcus for getting himself into so much trouble. "A wild animal belongs in the forest, not in a veterinary practice," said Mr. Schmidt, the retired teacher, didactically. The first complication didn't take long to appear. A few days later, while Marcus was visiting Lucky in his stall at the practice, he noticed a dark SUV driving slowly past the practice. The driver, a stocky man wearing sunglasses despite the gloomy weather, was staring openly out the practice window. Marcus felt an uneasy tingling in the back of his neck. The next day, the car was there again, this time parked on the other side of the street. The driver didn't get out, just watched. "I don't like that," Lena said when Marcus told her about it. "It could be a coincidence, but it doesn't feel like a coincidence." Marcus finished her sentence. The Shadow Catcher brand came back to him. Whoever was behind that name seemed to have gotten wind of where their property had ended up. The initial concern for an injured animal began to turn into a suspicion of something bigger, more threatening. The stakes had imperceptibly increased. It was no longer just about rescuing an animal, but also, potentially, about tangling with dangerous people. Marcus felt his determination grow, but also a hint of fear. The subtle threat of the dark SUV hung like a dark cloud over Marcus and Lena for several days. Meanwhile, Lucky was making good progress. The wound on his flank was healing, and he began to cautiously put weight on his splinted leg. He remained shy, but he seemed to slowly tolerate Lena's presence during feeding and treatment. He even showed less panic around Marcus, watching him with his large amber eyes as he spoke quietly. Bruno, who waited eagerly in the car during every visit, seemed to sense his master's tension and was even more alert than usual. The turning point came late one afternoon a week after Bruno found Lucky. Marcus was just locking up his workshop when two men entered the yard. One was the burly driver of the SUV he'd seen before, his features hard and unyielding. The other was taller, slimmer, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. He wore an expensive-looking coat that seemed out of place in the rustic surroundings of Marcus's carpentry shop. "Marcus Weber?" asked the slender man. His voice was quiet, almost cultured, but with a metallic undertone that betrayed no friendliness. Marcus felt his muscles tense. Bruno, who had been lying next to him at the workshop door, slowly rose, a deep growl vibrating in his throat. "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you?" "We're here for our property," the man said, making a vague gesture. "A small lynx. We heard you and your vet found it." Marcus's heart began to beat faster. So that was it. "Shadow catcher." "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "My dog found an injured wild animal. The vet is taking care of it." The burly man laughed mirthlessly. "Save the talk, Weber. We know he's with Dr. Vogel. The lynx belongs to us. He escaped. A minor accident." "If it's yours, you probably have papers for it," Marcus replied, although he knew it was a futile question. The slender man smiled thinly. "Papers are for bureaucrats. We're animal lovers, collectors of rare specimens. The little guy has a certain value to us. Sentimental, you see." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "We just want him back, discreetly, without any fuss." "He's seriously injured," Marcus said. "He still needs medical treatment." "We can offer him that too," said the man. "Probably better than your local vet." He took a step closer. Bruno growled louder, the hairs on his neck standing on end. "A beautiful dog," the man remarked casually, without looking at Bruno. "It would be a shame if something happened to him, or to your lovely workshop here." The threat was unmistakable. Marcus felt a wave of anger and fear rising within him. These weren't harmless animal lovers. These were criminals. He thought of Lucky, his panicked eyes, his raw wound and broken leg. He thought of Bruno's unwavering loyalty. "The lynx will stay where it is," Marcus said, his voice now firm and determined. "The authorities have been informed." The slender man sighed theatrically. "That's unfortunate, Mr. Weber. Very unfortunate. You're making things unnecessarily complicated." He turned to his companion. "Krentz, I don't think Mr. Weber fully understands the seriousness of the situation yet." Krentz, the burly man, grinned and took a step toward Bruno. "Maybe we should teach the mutt some manners." At that moment, Marcus made a decision. It wasn't a rational decision, not a well-thought-out strategy. It was an instinctive act of resistance. He couldn't and wouldn't give in to these men. This wasn't just about an injured lynx anymore. It was about decency, about justice, about protecting the defenseless. This was the point of no return. "Get off my property," Marcus said, his voice now shaking with suppressed anger. "Immediately." The slender man raised an eyebrow. "As you wish. But rest assured, Mr. Weber, we always get what we want, one way or another." He nodded to Krenz. "We're leaving, for now." The two men turned and left the courtyard as suddenly as they had come. Marcus remained behind, his heart pounding, his hands clenched into fists. Bruno whimpered softly and pressed himself against his leg. The visit of these men had changed everything. The vague threat had become concrete. He had confronted them head on. His initial intention of simply helping an animal had escalated into open conflict with dangerous opponents. He knew they would come back and that they wouldn't be squeamish. His naive hope that the authorities would sort this out quickly and easily had vanished. He and Lena were on their own, at least for the time being. Marcus went into the house and immediately called Lena. "They were here," he said bluntly. "They want Lucky back, and they threatened me." He could hear Lena's sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "I was afraid of that," she said. What now? Marcus looked out the window at the darkening forest. His old orderly life felt light years away. "Now," he said slowly, a new grim determination in his voice, "now we fight." He didn't know exactly how yet, but he knew he wouldn't give up. Lucky wasn't just a lynx. He was a symbol of something that needed to be defended, and Bruno, his faithful Bruno, had known that from the beginning. The immediate aftermath of the two men's visit was a surge of adrenaline followed by a gnawing fear. Marcus and Lena met that same evening. In Lena's practice, the door carefully locked, the blinds drawn. Lucky slept oblivious in his crate, his breathing calm and even. "We have to get him out of here," Lena said immediately. "My office isn't safe. You know he's here." Marcus nodded. "But where to?" "We can't take him back to the forest, not in this condition. And who would take him in without asking questions?" They discussed various options. An animal shelter. Most were overcrowded and didn't specialize in wild animals, especially not a lynx with such a dubious history. An official wildlife rescue center. These were often far away, and the bureaucratic hurdles were high, especially when it came to an animal that was obviously illegally kept and whose owners were now making claims. Those shadow catcher guys, they didn't sound like small fry, Marcus said thoughtfully. That one, the slim one, seemed like someone who was used to getting his way. Lena pulled out her laptop. "Let's do some research. Shadow catcher, illegal animal trafficking, Black Forest," she typed feverishly. The search results were initially sparse. A few vague forum posts about exotic animals being spotted in the region, rumors about a well-organized group trading in rare and protected species. Nothing concrete, nothing that directly led to a name or a location. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Lena sighed in frustration. These people are professionals. They know how to stay invisible. Marcus felt a growing despair. He had defied these men, but what now? How could he protect a small injured lynx from a criminal organization? He was just a simple carpenter, and Lena was just a village vet. They had no experience with this sort of thing. Self-doubt gnawed at him. Had he done the right thing? Had he put himself and Lena in danger? Maybe we should talk to the police again, he suggested, although he had little hope. Tell them about the visit, about the threats. Lena agreed. The next morning, they filed another report, this time in more detail. Village policeman Weber listened attentively, took notes, and promised to pass on the information. But his body language revealed that he couldn't do much. Threats are difficult to prove without witnesses or hard evidence, he repeated his mantra. And as long as these men aren't doing anything illegal, our hands are tied. The disappointment was great. They were on their own. We need a plan, Marcus said resolutely as they left the police station. His initial fear gave way to a new determination. He wouldn't let these criminals win. We need to get Lucky to a completely safe place, and we need to try to find evidence against these people. something that will force the police to act. Lena thought for a moment. I